Morning. Welcome to the Monday edition of Inside Nigeria. Today is September 22, 2025. And of course, my name is Winifred Ubebo, your host on the program. Today's show, we are looking at what the papers are saying. That is newspaper review. And of course, we are starting off from Nigeria's most influential newspaper, Leadership. Leadership's leading story today says Dangote Refinery is Nigeria's future. Otedola tells DAPPMAN. Dangote Refinery is Nigeria's future. Otedola tells DAPPMAN. Says old depot economy dying. Backs Dangote dismisses association's resistance. Leading story on today's Leadership. And this, of course, is also the leading story on all the papers we have on our lineup this Monday morning. Beneath that leading story, African Democratic Congress struggles for foothold in South Africa, in Southwest. That story is on page 4 of Leadership. African Democratic Congress, that is ADC, the newly registered party by INEC, struggles for foothold in Southwest. The story continues on page 4 of Leadership. Government probes outbreak of flesh-eating disease in Adamawa. That story is on page 4 of Leadership. From there, we move steadily to page 3 of the paper where we have our stand. Today's stand is still on Lassa fever epidemic. Still on Lassa fever epidemic. Today's stand in Leadership newspaper. Recently, the Nigerian Center for Disease Control and Prevention, NCDC, said that the country has so far this year recorded a total of 871 confirmed cases of Lassa fever, with 162 deaths and a case fatality rate climbing to 18.6%. It is instructive to know that Lassa fever has killed 883 Nigerians in just 5 years. Yet, every January when the dry season arrives, we act surprised by the outbreak. This is not a natural disaster striking without warning. It's a preventable public health emergency that exposes the bankruptcy of our healthcare system. We go towards the masthead. The pattern is clear. Every dry season brings predictable outbreaks, emergency responses, situation reports, and promises of better preparedness. Then attention shifts elsewhere until the next crisis arrives. This cycle has cost 883 lives in 5 years, and we claim hundreds more unless we break it. Lassa fever is a test of Nigeria's commitment to protecting its most vulnerable citizens. The disease disproportionately affects rural communities with limited political influence and economic resources. Excerpts from today's stand in Leadership, and today's stand, like I mentioned earlier, is still on Lassa fever epidemic. We move to the back page of the paper where we have Monday column with Dakuku Piti side. Today is writing on Arase, honoring the part of a police reformer. Dr. Arase's unwavering commitment to transparency and accountability was a cornerstone of his leadership. A quote from Monday's column with Dakuku Piti side, Arase, honoring the impact of a police reformer. Let's visit Ghana Must Go. On the news, Charlie Kirk's assassination divides Nigerians. And of course, Ghana Must Go says, be specific, jobless Nigerians. Jobless Nigerians, of course, is Nigerians that are interested in what's happening internationally. It's on that note we conclude review of Leadership newspaper this Monday morning. For more, log into the website of Leadership, www.leadership.ng. We move ahead to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is, I thought I was going to take Vanguard news, the Nation newspaper. However, we'll just move straight to Vanguard, because Vanguard, like I mentioned earlier, most of the papers have the same Otedola story on the cover. His advice to DAPPMAN, and Vanguard is no exception. Vanguard's leading story, though, is advertorial, says Otedola to DAPPMAN, your business model outdated, Dangote transforming petroleum sector. Otedola to DAPPMAN, just like we had in Leadership, your business model outdated, Dangote transforming petroleum sector. And it says any bank gross any source, crude oil imports hit record high as Dangote Refinery reshapes trade flow. These are stories gracing the cover of Vanguard. For more, log into the website of Vanguard newspaper. We move ahead to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is security story, and that is on the pages on the cover of Daily Sun this Monday. Daily Sun headline story says Benue police killings, federal government applies tougher measures, IG deploys more tactical operatives, arrest 6. Benue police killings, federal government applies tougher measures, IG deploys more tactical operatives, arrest 6. Main leading story today on Daily Sun newspaper. Israel dismisses Canada, UK, Australia recognition of Palestine as independent state, says there will never be such states. Cover of Daily Sun newspaper today. Of course, another paper has it that most of these foreign nations have endorsed the Palestinian state. However, Israel is resisting, dismisses Canada, UK, Australia recognition of Palestine as independent states, says there will never be such state. Tinubu to declare open 2025 editors conference in Abuja, November 4. Of course, that National Guild of Editors conference is taking place right here in the Federal Capital Territory, which President Bola Tinubu is expected to declare open. Government revokes additional 1,263 mineral licenses. Government revokes additional 1,263 mineral licenses. It's a story that is making the main cover in the Daily Times. Well, let's continue with Daily Sun review. Zenith Bank posts 2.5 trillion naira gross earnings, declares 1.25 naira interim dividend. We move towards the masthead of Daily Sun this Monday. Federal government to relocate 30,000 cattle out of Abuja, begins infrastructure development at 9,000 cow grazing reserve. Federal government to relocate 30,000 cattle out of Abuja, begins infrastructure development at 9,000 cow grazing reserve. And of course, let's take some excerpts from that leading story on Daily Sun. The Ministry of Livestock Development has commenced the process of relocating about 30,000 heads of cattle from Abuja city center to the 9,000 hectares area cow grazing reserve in Buhari Area Council with the concessioning of solar-powered borehole in the price facilities. These are excerpts from the second leading story on the cover of Daily Sun newspaper this Monday. Federal government to relocate 30,000 cattle out of Abuja, begins infrastructure development at 9,000 cow grazing reserve. Lastly, on the cover of Daily Sun, insecurity, Southeast governors incapacitated, monarchs cry out, demand state police. Of course, state police now is on the works as the stakeholders, President Bola Tinubu, the lawmakers fine-tune. Even the northern elders have actually called for state police fine-tune details to start implementing state police. It's on that note we conclude review of front headline stories on daily newspaper. For more, log into the website of Daily Sun newspaper. We move ahead to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is the Punch newspaper. The Punch leading story says Ibas rejects Assembly's move to probe 6 months spending. Of course, when the state lawmakers of Rivers State convened when the emergency rule was lifted, they did say they were going to start probing the 6-month rule of Ibas. And today on the Punch newspaper, a developing story, Ibas rejects Assembly's move to prove his 6-month spending as administrator insists lawmakers lack power to question tenure. CSOs urge Fubara to hold Ibas accountable. These are kickers to the leading story, main leading story on the cover of the Punch newspaper this morning. Ibas rejects Assembly's move to probe 6-month spending. And also, okay, we move to the masthead of the Punch newspaper. Crude supply to domestic refineries hit 67.6 million barrels. Crude supply to domestic refineries hit 67.6 million barrels. Lastly, on the cover of the Punch, Bono terrorist attack victims hospitalized in Cameroon. And lastly, we also have that same Otedola story just beneath the masthead of the Punch this Monday at Vatoria, actually. Dangote Refinery. Change has come to the oil sector. Nigerian economy. Otedola tells DAPPMAN. And that concludes review of front headline stories on the Punch this Monday. For more, log in to the website of the Punch. We move to the next paper, and that is the Daily Times. Daily Times says federal government revokes 1,263 mineral licenses for defaulting annual fees. That main story continues on page 7 of the Daily Times. Federal government revokes 1,263 mineral licenses for defaulting annual fees. NIMET predicts 3-day rains, thunderstorms in Adamawa, Kaduna, Bauchi, orders. NIMET predicts 3-day rain, thunderstorms in Adamawa, Kaduna, Bauchi, orders. Aba 6 medical trade partnerships as Cuba strengthens ties with Nigeria. Failed transactions, banks customers decry delay, tedious process of money reversal. ADC factions use INEC for recognizing Mark Aregbesola. That story is on page 7 of the paper. And lastly, on the cover of the Daily Times, CJN to inaugurate 57 new SANs as Supreme Court marks new legal year, September 29. CJN, that is the Chief Justice of Nigeria, to inaugurate 57 new SANs as Supreme Court marks new legal year, September 29. That also brings to a close the review of front headline stories on the Daily Times this Monday. For more, log into the website of the Daily Times. We move ahead to the next paper, and which is the last paper on our lineup this Monday, and that is our sister publication, National Economy. This week's main headline story on the print edition of National Economy says recapitalization. Nigerian banks raised 3 trillion naira from domestic investors. Recapitalization. Nigerian banks raised 3 trillion naira from domestic investors as more banks scramble for funds. Mergers, acquisitions expected before deadline. Experts say recapitalization will spur risk, job losses, growth, and regional expansion. These are kickers to the main leading story on the print edition of National Economy this Monday. Recapitalization. Nigerian banks raised 3 trillion naira from domestic investors. Beneath that leading story, cutting government waste, Nigeria's unfinished reform is another story gracing the cover of National Economy, and it runs on page 12 of the paper. Cutting government waste, Nigeria's unfinished reform. Atop the masthead of National Economy, Nigeria Dutch Company Inc. agreement on major solar panel factory. Nigeria Dutch Company Inc. agreement on major solar panel factory. Lastly, on the cover of National Economy, federal government rolls out $3.14 billion investment drive for agriculture. That story continues on page 4 of National Economy. Federal government rolls out $3.14 billion investment drive for agriculture. And that concludes the review of front headline stories on National Economy. But before we leave National Economy, let's visit the editorial for this week. The editorial is on investing in food storage infrastructure, a national imperative. Investing in food storage infrastructure, a national imperative. Nigeria's persistent battle with hunger is not solely the product of low agricultural output. In fact, farmers across the country produce vast quantities of food each year. The tragedy lies in the alarming levels of post-harvest losses, with estimates suggesting that up to 40% of crops never make it to the consumer's table. This is largely because the nation has failed to invest in modern storage and preservation infrastructure. These are excerpts from this week's editorial in National Economy. Investing in food storage infrastructure, a national imperative. That also brings to a close the review of our sister publication, our weekly business newspaper on the stable of leadership newspaper, National Economy. For more, don't forget to visit the website of National Economy for more of the stories, www.nationaleconomy.com. Well, viewers, is on this note we conclude today's Inside Nigeria, where we dwelt mostly on newspaper review on today's show. My name is Winifred Webo. I look forward to having you same time, same station for another fresh edition of the program. Thanks for joining us.
Be part of our brand. Leadership for God and country. Be part of our brand. Leadership for God and country.